Something happened on October 13th, 2025, that has the entire astronomical community either scrambling for explanations or pretending they didn't see it. An interstellar object, the one we've been tracking for months, allegedly sent out light pulses in a sequence that shouldn't exist naturally. 5813, the Fibonacci sequence. And if that wasn't strange enough, this happened on the exact anniversary of one of the most witnessed unexplained phenomena in modern history, the miracle of the sun at Fatima, Portugal, 108 years ago to the day. Tens of thousands of people watched the sun dance in the sky in 1917. Now, on that same date, an object from beyond our solar system pulses light in the mathematical fingerprint of creation itself, the golden ratio. While NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory conveniently went offline for maintenance, and while the best imaging system we have at Mars has been down since October 1st, giving just enough time for any inconvenient data to disappear. So, tonight, we're diving into what might be the most significant development in the 3i Atlas story yet, or the most elaborate information leak designed to prepare us for something we're not ready to see. Either way, what's unfolding right now, hidden behind the sun where we can't observe it, demands your attention. If you find yourself coming back to this channel, please hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed. Only about 30% of our regular viewers are actually subscribed, so double check that you're not missing future updates and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing our community spread across the globe. The big bang of the day, Fibonacci pulses on Fatima's anniversary. Let's start with the claim itself because it's wild enough that even bringing it up requires careful framing. On October 13th, 2025, researcher David Charita published an analysis stating that 3 Atlas, now positioned behind the sun from our perspective on Earth, was observed sending light pulses in the Fibonacci sequence. 5, 8, 13. 3 numbers that appear throughout nature in the spiral of a nautilus shell, the branching of trees, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. They're the mathematical expression of phi, the golden ratio 1.618, the number that seems to encode efficiency and beauty into the fabric of reality itself. Charita, who's been tracking 3 Atlas through what he calls his hyperdimensional solar system model, claims these pulses correspond to specific celestial domains in his framework. 5 equals Earth, 8 equals what he calls Planet 591, a theoretical body orbiting between Mars and the asteroid belt. And 13 equals the virtues, which in his model aligns with something he's named after Methuselah, the biblical figure who lived 969 years. Hold that number, we'll come back to it. Now, before you dismiss this entirely, understand that Charita has made previous claims about 3i Atlas that initially looked absurd, but later gained unexpected support from other data. He's not a mainstream astronomer, but he's also not just making things up out of thin air. His analysis draws from Tesla, from ancient sacred geometry, from Dante's Paradiso written in 1321, and from orbital mechanics that, whether you believe his conclusions or not, do show some genuinely strange alignments. The timing alone is what makes people pause. October 13th, 108 years after the Fatima event. In Charita's model, 108 is a harmonic frequency of 432 Hz, which various fringe and mainstream researchers associate with natural resonance. 108, 2, 262, 432. These are the kind of numbers that show up in ancient architecture, in the dimensions of the Great Pyramid, in musical scales that predate modern tuning. Whether that means anything cosmically significant, or whether humans just like certain ratios, is the eternal question. But here's where it gets uncomfortable for the skeptics. NASA shut down the Solar Dynamics Observatory's live feed on October 13th. They cited routine maintenance. The timing, though, is the kind of coincidence that makes even level-headed scientists squint. The SDO is one of our primary tools for observing solar activity and anything passing near the sun. If 3i Atlas were going to do something unusual while positioned behind our star, the STTO would be the instrument most likely to catch it. And it went dark. Then there's HiRISE, the high-resolution imaging science experiment camera aboard the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. It's been offline since October 1st, HiRISE is capable of resolving objects down to 30 km per pixel at 3i atlases distance during the Mars flyby. That level of detail could potentially reveal structural features, surface composition anomalies, anything that might suggest this object isn't just a dirty snowball from another star system. The official explanation is that one of the camera's electronics units has been failing since August 2023. Plausible, but the timing of the complete shutdown, right before the most critical observation window we'll have for months, feels almost scripted. Add to this the broader context. On October the 1st, the United States government entered a shutdown. Over 15,000 NASA employees were furloughed. 2 days later, Thermid Atlas made its closest approach to Mars, 29 million kilometers, the best opportunity for detailed imaging and spectroscopy. Yet, as of now, mid-October, no official HiRISE images have been released, no processed data from the Mars orbiters, no updates from NASA beyond preliminary statements that essentially say it's probably just a comet. The European Space Agency released a few images from their Mars Express and ExoM Mars TRAPPIST orbiter, showing a faint white dot. That's it. Nothing with the resolution we were promised. So when David Sarita publishes an analysis claiming 3i Atlas sent Fibonacci pulses on the Fatima anniversary, the immediate response isn't just, is this true? It's, is this a leak? Sarita himself frames it that way. He openly questions whether what he's presenting is a hoax or whether it's information being released through unconventional channels to avoid direct attribution. He notes that 2 previous leaks about 3 Atlas that initially appeared fake later turned out to contain accurate information that was only confirmed by official sources weeks afterward. This is the pattern we've seen in other high strangeness cases. Information appears in fringe communities or through unverified sources. It's dismissed. Then, quietly, elements of it are confirmed through official channels, but never with direct acknowledgement. The phenomenon gets plausible deniability. The insiders who leaked it avoid consequences, and the public is left trying to assemble a puzzle where half the pieces are labeled fiction and the other half are labeled classified. Let's dig into what Sarita actually claims the Fibonacci numbers mean. In his hyperdimensional solar system model, which he developed with his late partner Crystal Manaka Sarita, there are 9 hidden planets or orbital resonances that correspond to ancient cosmological models. Dante's Paradiso describes 9 celestial spheres, each associated with different angelic orders. Sarita maps these onto orbital periods calculated by dividing 591, his proposed central orbital period in Earth days, by the golden ratio over and over. When you do that math, you get numbers that eerily match the orbital periods of known planets. Earth's exact sidereal year of 256 days appears when you divide 591 by 5. The orbit of Mars, Venus, Mercury, even the outer planets all seem to cluster around these ratios with accuracy that's hard to dismiss as pure coincidence. Sarita points out that 3i Atlas's rotation period was measured at 1616 hours, which converts to 969.6 minutes, 969, the age of Methuselah in the Bible. Now you can argue that with enough mathematical gemsticks, you can make any number fit any pattern, and that's fair. But the specific claim here is that 3i Atlas on October 13th transmitted 5813. In Sarita's model, 5 is Earth's position in the harmonic sequence. 8 is the domain of what he calls the dominions, the theoretical planet 591. 13 is the virtues tied to the outermost edge of this inner system. If an intelligence were using this object to communicate, and if that intelligence understood how humans have encoded cosmic order into myth and sacred geometry, then sending these 3 numbers would be a way of saying, quote, les douces. The alternative explanation is that someone on Earth fabricated this data, timed it to the Fatima anniversary for maximum psychological impact, and released it through Sarita to gauge public reaction. That's also entirely possible. In fact, it might be more likely. But then you have to ask why. What's the benefit of creating a false narrative about an interstellar object that's already anomalous enough without embellishment? If this is disinformation, who benefits? And what's the end game? There's a third option that doesn't get discussed enough. What if the data is real, but it's not coming from 3 Atlas? What if there's a terrestrial or near-Earth source generating signals that appear to originate from the comet's position? That could be a test of detection. Capabilities, a way to measure how the public and the scientific community respond to potential non-human communication. It could be part of a broader disclosure strategy, incrementally introducing concepts that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Aviv, the Harvard astrophysicist, who's been one of the few mainstream scientists willing to publicly entertain the extraterrestrial hypothesis, hasn't commented directly on the Fibonacci pulse claim, but he has repeatedly emphasized that 3 Atlas displays anomalies inconsistent with natural comets, the nickel-rich iron-free emissions, the anti-Euler tail pointing toward the sun instead of away from it, the mass calculations suggesting an object over 33 billion tons, far larger than its brightness alone, would indicate. Low ranks 3I Atlas at a 6 on his proposed scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is definitely natural and 10 is definitely technological. A 6 means we should be taking this seriously, not dismissing it out of hand. The Fatima connection adds a layer that makes scientists deeply uncomfortable because it ventures into the realm of the mystical. On October 13, 1917, between 60,000 and 100,000 people gathered in the Cova area near Fatima, Portugal. They had been told by 3 shepherd children that the Virgin Mary would perform a miracle. What happened next was witnessed by believers and skeptics alike. The sun appeared to change colors, spin, and plunge toward the earth before returning to its normal position. Clothing that had been soaked by rain suddenly dried. Some reported seeing visions, others just the solar phenomenon. Skeptics have proposed various explanations: mass hallucination induced by staring at the sun, atmospheric optical effects caused by dust or moisture, psychological suggestion amplified by religious fervor. But none of these fully account for the physical effects, the dried clothing, the fact that people in different locations reported the same sequence of events, and the specificity of the prediction made months in advance. If you're looking for a pattern, it's there. A predicted celestial event witnessed by a massive crowd on October 13th, 108 years later, to the day an object from interstellar space positioned behind the sun at the moment of its closest approach to our star allegedly emits pulses that encode mathematical truths. Humans have spent millennia trying to understand, and the tools we'd normally use to verify or debunk this are conveniently offline. Richard C. Hoagland, another researcher who operates on the fringe of mainstream acceptance, but who has a background in NASA communications, calculated the harmonic significance of that 108-year gap. 108 is not arbitrary. It appears in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology as the number of sacred recitations. 108 beads on a mala. 108 grados is the internal temperature where human cells begin to die. 108 is a multiple of 9, which itself factors into the mathematics of the solar system's architecture. Hoagland suggests that whoever or whatever is behind 3 Atlas understands not just physics, but human symbology. That brings us back to Dante. Dante Alighieri completed the Paradiso, the final section of the Divine Comedy, around 1321. He described the cosmos as a series of nested spheres, each governed by angelic intelligences and aligned with specific virtues. The dominions, the virtues, the powers. These weren't just poetic inventions. They were Dante's attempt to reconcile to astronomy with Christian theology. Sarita points out that Dante's model, 7 centuries old, maps almost perfectly onto his hyperdimensional solar system when you apply the golden ratio as the organizing principle. Now, 704 years after Dante wrote those words, an interstellar object appears, crosses through our solar system on a retrograde orbit that passes within 5 degrees of the ecliptic, and if Sarita's claim holds, transmits numbers that directly reference that same cosmological framework. Either Dante somehow intuited a structure that extraterrestrial intelligences also recognize, or someone with deep knowledge of both human history and celestial mechanics is orchestrating an incredibly elaborate message. The challenge with evaluating this is that we're operating in a near-total information blackout. 3 Atlas reached perihelion, its closest approach to the sun, on October 29th. It's now on the far side of our star, invisible to Earth-based telescopes, and will remain so until early December. Whatever it's doing right now, we can't see. The JUICE spacecraft, the European Space A's Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, is scheduled to observe 3 Atlas in November using multiple instruments. But that data won't be transmitted back to Earth until February 2026 because JUICE is currently using its high-gain antenna as a heat shield and is too far from Earth to send high-bandwidth data. So, we wait. And while we wait, the speculation intensifies. Forums on Reddit dedicated to 3i Atlas have exploded with activity. The 3i Atlas subreddit, which barely existed 2 months ago, now has thousands of active members posting observations, theories, and alleged leaks. Some of it is noise. A lot of it is wishful thinking. But buried in there are people with legitimate astronomical backgrounds noticing things that don't add up. One user compiled a timeline of every official statement NASA's made about 3i Atlas and compared it to the actual data releases. The pattern is clear. Every time anomalous findings are reported by independent observatories, NASA issues a bland reassurance that it's consistent with cometry behavior. But the detailed data that would support those reassurances never appears. The high-risk images that should have been released by now, nothing. The spectroscopic analysis from the Mars flyby, nothing. Even basic astrometry, the precise position measurements needed to refine the object's trajectory, have been slower to update than they were for previous interstellar objects. This could be bureaucracy. It could be the government shutdown disrupting normal workflows. Or it could be something else. When you combine the observation blackout with the timing of the alleged Fibonacci pulses, with the Fatima anniversary, with the fact that 3 Atlas is now in the perfect position to perform a maneuver we couldn't detect from Earth, the shape of a narrative starts to form, and it's not a comfortable one. David Sarita's warning is blunt. If these pulses are real, if 3 Atlas is indeed using sacred geometry and historical synchronicities to communicate, then we are not dealing with a random chunk of ice that wandered into our neighborhood. We're dealing with something that knows us, that has studied our species, our myths, our mathematics, and is choosing this moment to make contact in a language designed to bypass scientific gatekeepers and speak directly to the part of human consciousness that recognizes pattern and meaning. The implications of that are staggering. It would mean the Fatima event, whatever it actually was, is part of a longer timeline of contact. It would mean our religious traditions, our sacred numbers, our architectural alignments to celestial bodies, all of it might be responses to interventions we've misinterpreted as divine or mystical. It would rewrite history. But it would also require accepting a level of intelligence and intentionality that most scientists are not prepared to entertain. It's easier to file this under elaborate hoax or fringe speculation than to seriously consider that an interstellar object might be encoding messages in the mathematics of creation on the anniversary of one of the 20th century's most documented, unexplained events. Yet, here we are, and the object is still out there hidden behind the sun doing whatever it's doing while we sit in the dark waiting for December, waiting for the JUICE data, waiting for someone to finally release images that should have been public weeks ago. Think about that for a moment. The most significant potential evidence for non-human intelligence, or at least for something profoundly anomalous, is occurring right now, and we're locked out of observing it by a combination of orbital mechanics, equipment failures, and government shutdowns. The timing is impeccable, too impeccable. So we move forward with questions we can't yet answer. Did 3 Atlas really send Fibonacci pulses on October 13th? If so, how was that data obtained, and by whom? Why hasn't it been verified or debunked by official sources? And if it's a fabrication, what purpose does it serve to release this specific narrative at this specific time? The answers, if they come at all, won't arrive until the object emerges from behind the sun. Until then, all we have is the mathematics, the synchronicities, and the unsettling feeling that something is being communicated in a language we've forgotten how to speak. But as we're about to see, the Fibonacci pulses are just the beginning of the stranges. Because the position 3i Atlas occupies right now, the timing of its perihelion and what it could potentially do while hidden from our view might be the most critical part of this entire story. Perihelion blackout. the object behind the sun. There's a window of opportunity that opens exactly once during 3 Atlas's passage through our solar system. A window where if you wanted to do something without being observed, the geometry of orbital mechanics hands you perfect cover. That window opened on October 29, 2025, when the object reached perihelion, and it won't close until early December. For roughly 6 weeks, 3 Atlas is positioned behind the sun from Earth's perspective, invisible to our telescopes, hidden in the glare of the star that gives us life. And if Avil's calculations are correct, this is precisely where and when an intelligent object would execute what's called a reverse solar oath maneuver. Let's break down what that means, because the implications are genuinely unsettling. The Orth effect is a principle of orbital mechanics where a spacecraft gets maximum benefit from a propulsion burn when it's moving fastest, typically at the closest point to a massive body like the sun. For an object entering the solar system at high speed, the best place to decelerate and capture into a bound orbit is right at perihelion. You fire your engines when the sun's gravity is pulling you fastest, and the combination of your thrust and the gravitational assist allows you to shed velocity much more efficiently than if you burned fuel out in deep space. Now, imagine you're an interstellar probe arriving in a system you want to study. You don't want to announce your intentions. You time your approach so that perihelion occurs when you're on the opposite side of the sun from the civilization you are observing. They can't see you. Their solar monitoring instruments are either offline or looking at the wrong wavelength. You execute your burn, drop into a solar orbit, and by the time you emerge on the other side, you're no longer an interstellar interloper heading back out into the void. You're a resident, and they won't know until you decide to reveal yourself. 3I Atlas reached perihelion at 1.44 astronomical units from the sun, roughly 203 million kilometers, placing it just inside the orbit of Mars, but still well within what would be considered the inner solar system. The exact date, October 29th to 30th, falls within a range that David Sarita has connected to other significant events, including the traditional calculation of Prophet Muhammad's birth date. Whether that's meaningful or coincidental, the fact remains that this object is now in the optimal position to change its trajectory without us knowing. Lowe has been explicit about this risk. In multiple blog posts and interviews throughout October, he stated that if 3 Atlas executes a velocity change of 30 to 40 km/s during the perihelion passage, it could reach Earth as early as late November or December. That's not speculation, that's orbital mechanics. An object with sufficient propulsion using the sun's gravity well as a slingshot could arrive in Earth's vicinity within weeks of perihelion. We wouldn't see it coming until it emerged from the solar glare, already on an intercept course. The natural response is, but it's just a comet. Comets don't have engines, and that's correct. Natural comets don't. But 3I Atlas has displayed enough anomalies that the question of whether it's entirely natural is no longer absurd. The nickel emissions without corresponding iron, the anti-solar tail, the rotation period encoded in biblical numerology, the trajectory that passes within 0.0005% probability of 3 major planets. At some point, the stack of coincidences gets tall enough that refusing to consider alternatives becomes its own form of bias. What makes the current blackout particularly frustrating is that we do have assets in position to observe. ESA's DOUCE spacecraft, currently en route to Jupiter, has a relatively clear line of sight to 3IA Atlas during November. The spacecraft is equipped with cameras, spectrometers, and particle sensors capable of detecting activity that Earth-based instruments can't see from behind the sun. Observations are scheduled between November 2nd and 25th, but here's the catch. JUICE is so far from Earth right now and traveling in such a position relative to the sun that it's using its high-gain antenna as a heat shield. It can only transmit data through its medium-gain antenna and at a much reduced rate. The full dataset from JUICE's observations of 3 Atlas won't be downlinked and processed until February 2026. That's 4 months from now, 4 months during which, if the object did something unusual, if it deployed smaller probes, if it altered course, if it showed any sign of artificial structural propulsion, we won't know. The data exists, It's sitting in Juice's memory banks traveling through the outer solar system, but it's functionally inaccessible. Then, there's the question of what happens on December 25th. Multiple researchers, including Sarita and Michael Benjamin, have calculated that 3i Atlas will be at what's called Great Pyramid angle into Earth on Christmas Day. The Great Pyramid of Giza has a slope angle of 51 km 51 minutes. This angle appears throughout ancient architecture and is often associated with alignments to celestial bodies. On December 25, 2025, 3i Atlas will be positioned at this precise angle relative to Earth position. Now, you can dismiss this as numerology. The universe is full of angles, and if you calculate enough of them, you'll eventually find matches to human structures. But the timing is what stands out. Christmas Day, the symbolic birth of a figure who in Western tradition represents a divine messenger bridging heaven and earth. If you were designing a disclosure event, a moment where an interstellar object reveals itself to a global audience primed by religious and cultural symbolism, Christmas Day at Great Pyramid angle would be hard to beat. Sarah goes further. He notes that from October 19, 2024 to December 25, 2025 is exactly 432 days. That number again, the harmonic frequency 432 Hz, is advocated by some researchers as the natural tuning standard as opposed to the modern 440 Hz concert pitch. Whether there's any physical significance to this or whether its pattern matching is debatable. But the fact that someone calculated it, that the number appears, adds another layer to the synchronicity stack. The intermediate date of importance is December 19th when 3i Atlas makes its closest approach to Earth at 1.88 astronomical units, about 269 million kilometers. That's still far, over 700 times the distance to the Moon. There's no collision risk, but it's close enough for serious observation once the object emerges from behind the Sun in early December. Telescopes worldwide will be trained on it. If there are any visual anomalies, any structural features inconsistent with a natural comet, that's when we'll see them. Assuming, of course, that those images are released. The pattern established during the Mars flyby doesn't inspire confidence. ESA did release photos from the ExoMars Tracus orbiter showing 3i Atlas as a small white dot against the Martian sky. The images are real. They confirm the object was where orbital calculations predicted, but they show almost nothing of scientific value. No resolution of the nucleus, no detailed spectroscopy, nothing that would help determine composition or structure beyond what ground-based telescopes already revealed. NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, equipped with the high-rise camera capable of much higher resolution, has released nothing. Amateur astronomers have processed publicly available raw image data from the Perseverance rover and claim to have spotted a faint smudge in the expected position of 3 Atlas. On October 1st, astrophotographer Simeon Schmaus stacked 20 images from the rover's mass cam instrument and identified what he believes is the comet in the constellation Corona Borealis. If accurate, that's our earliest look at 3 Atlases seen from Mars, but it's not official, it's not confirmed, and it doesn't provide the clarity we need. What happened to the piracy images? The official NASA line is that the camera has been experiencing issues since August 2023, and data processing is delayed due to the government shutdown. Both statements are verifiable, but the combination of equipment problems, government disruption, and the object's disappearance behind the Sun creates a perfect storm of plausible deniability. If you wanted to suppress data, you couldn't ask for better cover. If it's just bad luck and bureaucratic slowness, the optics are terrible. Lowe addressed this directly in interviews during the first week of October. He pointed out that the high-risk camera would provide images with pixel resolution of 30 kilometers, about 3 times better than what Hubble achieved in July. At that resolution, if 3 Atlas has any surface features, any geometric structures, anything inconsistent with a fractured ice ball, HERSIS would see it. The fact that we're now weeks past the flyby with no official release raises questions that go beyond normal scientific caution. Then there's the political dimension. On October 3rd, during a Newsmax interview, Lowe discussed the 7 primary anomalies of 3 Atlas. Immediately following that segment, Stephen Miller, then serving as Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy at the White House, was asked whether the president had been briefed on 3 Atlas. The question itself is significant. It means the object has risen to a level of attention where political figures are being asked about it on national television. Miller's response or lack thereof didn't clarify anything, but the fact that the question was posed indicates 3 Atlas is no longer just an astronomical curiosity. It's entered the realm of policy consideration. What would a presidential briefing on 3 Atlas include? Presumably, the classified data we're not seeing. High-resolution imagery from military surveillance assets that are never publicly acknowledged, spectroscopic analysis beyond what civilian instruments can provide, trajectory models that account for potential maneuvers and risk assessments. If there's even a 5% chance this object is artificial and potentially directed, that becomes a national security matter. Not because of immediate threat, but because of the implications for humanity's place in the cosmos and the potential for societal disruption if mishandled. The phrase that keeps appearing in discussions of 3 Atlas among those taking the extraterrestrial hypothesis seriously is the dark forest. It comes from Lou Chichickson's science fiction novel of the same name, but the concept is older. The idea is that the universe is like a dark forest filled with hunters. Every civilization is a potential threat. The safest strategy is to stay silent and hidden, because announcing your presence invites annihilation. If you do encounter another civilization, you strike first, because waiting allows them to potentially become an existential threat. Lowe's paper with Adam Hybard and Adam Craw, titled Ati quote Beinorn, frames the dark forest scenario as one possible explanation for why we haven't detected obvious signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. If most civilizations operate under dark forest logic, then any probe sent into another system would be designed to observe covertly. It would mimic natural objects. It wouldn't broadcast signals, and it would only reveal itself when strategically advantageous. In that framework, 3 Atlas, arriving on a trajectory that allows close observation of multiple planets, executing perihelion behind the sun where it can't be watched, and potentially timing its emergence with culturally significant dates, is exactly what you'd expect. The probe studies the system. It determines the level of technological development. It waits for a moment of maximum psychological impact. Then it reveals itself not through radio signals that scientists can control and gatekeep, but through visual presence that anyone with a telescope can verify. The counter-argument is straightforward. Comets do weird things. Outgassing creates non-gravitational accelerations. Composition varies depending on formation conditions in the original star system. The lack of iron in the spectrum could be explained by depletion during the object's journey through interstellar space. The trajectory, while statistically unusual, is not impossible. And invoking alien intelligence as an explanation is a massive leap that requires extraordinary evidence. That's all valid, but the extraordinary evidence bar is a moving target. At what point does the accumulation of anomalies cross the threshold? If 3 Atlas were to emerge from behind the sun in December and show clear signs of geometric structure, would that be enough? If it altered trajectory in a way that can't be explained by outgassing, would that do it? Or would there always be another natural explanation to grasp at another reason to delay the conclusion that we're not alone? The historical parallel that comes up repeatedly as the Galileo affair. When Galileo observed moons orbiting Jupiter, it contradicted the geocentric model that Earth was the center of creation. The data was clear, but accepting it meant overturning centuries of religious and philosophical certainty. So, the data was resisted. Galileo was silenced, and it took generations for the obvious truth to be fully integrated. We like to think we're past that. But the resistance to even considering 3 Atlas might be artificial suggests we're not as intellectually flexible as we pretend. What's happening right now in the 6-week window of the perihelion blackout could be the most important astronomical event in human history. Or it could be nothing. A chunk of ancient ice passing through, behaving exactly as comets behave, and we're projecting our hopes and fears onto random fluctuations in brightness and chemistry. The problem is, we can't know which until the object emerges. And by then, if it has changed course, if it has deployed subsystems, if it has done anything other than follow a ballistic trajectory, it will be too late to prepare for whatever comes next. Lowers suggested that if 3/8 shows continued anomalies after perihelion, proposals should be made to intercept it with a probe of our own. Not to destroy it, but to study it up close, to image it from meters away, to sample its composition and look for anything that doesn't fit natural formation models. That kind of mission would take years to plan and execute. But if we wait for absolute certainty before acting, the object will be gone, accelerating back into interstellar space, and will have missed the only chance in our lifetimes to definitively answer the question. December is going to be fascinating. Amateur astronomers are already coordinating observation campaigns. The moment 3 Atlas emerges from the sun's glare, hundreds of telescopes will be pointed at it. Any visible changes, any new features, any deviation from predicted trajectory will be documented within hours. The scientific community won't be able to gatekeep this one. If something is there to see, the world will see it. But until then, we're in the dark, literally and figuratively. An object from another star system is doing something or doing nothing in the one place in the solar system where we can't watch. And the tools and systems that should be giving us answers are offline, delayed, or locked behind classification barriers we can't penetrate. The synchronicities are piling up. The timing is impeccable, and the silence from official sources is deafening. Whatever 3 Atlas is, whatever it's doing, we're about to find out if the universe is as empty as we've been told, or if we've been under observation all along, waiting for the right moment to be introduced to our cosmic neighbors or cosmic predators, depending on which version of the dark forest theory turns out to be true. Space and astronomy, the anomalies pile up. When astronomers talk about something being anomalous, they usually mean it falls slightly outside expected parameters. A comet that's a bit brighter than predicted. An asteroid with an unusual rotation period. Small deviations that require footnotes in papers, but don't challenge fundamental understanding. 3 Atlas isn't that kind of anomalous. It's a cascade of violations, each one individually explainable with creative reasoning, but collectively forming a pattern that doesn't fit any natural object we've encountered. Start with the anti-solar tail. Normal comets have tails that point away from the sun. This happens because solar radiation pressure pushes the lighter dust and gas particles outward, creating the classic streaming appearance we associate with comets. It's fundamental physics. Light carries momentum, and when photons from the sun hit particles in the coma, they transfer that momentum away from the star. Every comet observed in human history has followed this pattern until 3I Atlas. Images from the Keck Observatory taken on August 24, 2025, show something different. There's a faint tail extending in the direction of the sun, not away, toward. The researchers at the University of Hawaii who analyzed the Keck data confirmed it. This anti-solar tail, as they're calling it, extends for hundreds of kilometers sunward from the nucleus. The proposed explanation is that larger, heavier dust particles are being ejected from the sun-facing side of the nucleus with enough velocity that they briefly travel toward the sun before solar radiation and gravity curve them back is possible. The physics works barely, but it requires assuming an ejection mechanism more powerful than what we see in normal cometry outgassing. Then, there's the issue of what's actually being ejected. Spectroscopic analysis from the Keck Cosmic Web Imager revealed prominent nickel emission lines, strong, clear, unmistakable. Nickel is not rare in comets. What's rare is nickel without iron. The two elements form together in stellar nuclear synthesis and generally exist in predictable ratios. When you see nickel in a comet spectrum, you expect to see iron as well. 3 Atlas shows nickel, no iron, none detected. Aviv was quick to point out the significance. The only known process that produces pure nickel emissions without iron is the carbonyl pathway used in industrial nickel refinement on Earth. Nickel tetracarbonyl, a toxic compound used in electroplating and metalling. It forms when nickel reacts with carbon monoxide under specific conditions. The process was discovered by Ludwig Mond in the 1880s and revolutionized metal purification. Finding that signature in a comet from another star system is, to put it mildly, unexpected. The research team that published the Chaque findings suggested that a natural carbonyl reaction could be occurring near the nucleus of 3 Atlas. Carbon monoxide is present. We know that from James Webb Space Telescope observations. If conditions are right, perhaps nickel in the nucleus is reacting with that carbon monoxide to form nickel carbonyl compounds that then dissociate in sunlight, releasing pure nickel gas into the coma. It's chemically plausible, but the specificity of conditions required makes it a very narrow explanation for a very strange observation. The spatial distribution adds another wrinkle. The nickel emission extends to about 600 kilometers from the nucleus. Cyanide extends to 840 kilometers. Both form distinct plumes with clear boundaries, not the diffuse gradual fade you'd expect from random outgassing. The fact that these two chemicals have different scale lengths suggests they're being produced or released through different mechanisms or from different locations on the nucleus. That kind of structure implies a heterogeneity in the object's composition or activity. Now, let's talk about the water problem. NASA's Neil Gerald Swift Observatory observed 3 Atlas in July and August, measuring water production rates. They found the comet is losing water at roughly 40 kilograms per second. For comparison, imagine a fire hose running at full blast continuously for months. That's the analogy scientists are using. 40 kilograms is a lot of water for an object that's still relatively far from the sun. Most comets don't start heavy water loss until they're much closer inside 1 astronomical unit. But here's the paradox. When NASA's Transiting Exoplanet Survey satellite observed 3I Atlas back in May and June, before the official discovery, researchers stacked over 9,000 images to look for signs of a coma. They found almost nothing. The radial brightness profile was nearly identical to inactive asteroids. No extended envelope of gas and dust. Yet by July, barely a month later, the object is blasting water into space at industrial rates. Either the activity ramped up incredibly fast, or the early observations missed something fundamental. The explanation offered is that gas and dust ejected in May wouldn't have had time to form a visible extended coma in the test images due to the time delay between emission and detection. Possible. But it creates a picture of an object that was essentially dormant when it was 6.4 before astronomical units from the sun, then suddenly switched on as it crossed some threshold distance. Comets do activate at different distances based on composition, but the speed of the transition here is unusual. Then there's the composition itself. James Webb observations from early August revealed that 3 Atlas is roughly 87% carbon dioxide, 9% carbon monoxide, and only 4% water by volume of volatiles being released. That's backwards. Normal comets, including the previous interstellar comet 2I Borisov, are water-dominated. Water ice is the primary volatile carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide are secondary. 3I Atlas flips that ratio. It's a carbon comet that happens to have some water. Not a water comet with some carbon, has implications for formation environment. The high carbon dioxide content suggests 3I Atlas formed in a region of its home star system that was colder than where most objects in our solar system formed. Carbon dioxide ice requires lower temperatures to condense than water ice. If 3I Atlas is carbon-rich, it likely formed in the outer reaches of its natal system, far from its star in conditions similar to our Kuiper belt, but possibly even colder. That tells us something about the planetary system it came from. It had a cold outer region with abundant carbon compounds, but it also raises the question of how such an object gets ejected into interstellar space. You need a gravitational interaction, probably with a large planet, to kick something out of a stable orbit. The presence of 3I Atlas implies its home system had giant planets in the outer zones, capable of scattering material. The size estimates keep shifting, and that's a problem. Early brightness suggested the nucleus could be anywhere from 4 to 24 kilometers in diameter. That's a huge range. More refined observations narrowed it down. Hubble data from August indicated the upper limit is 5.6 kilometers with a lower limit around 440 meters. That's still a factor of 10 uncertainty. The issue is that we're trying to estimate size from brightness, and brightness depends on both size and reflectivity. If 3i Atlas has a very dark surface, it could be larger than we think. If it's unusually reflective, it could be much smaller. Why does size matter? Because of the mass calculations, Lowe determined that for 3i Atlas to resist the rocket-like forces from outgassing and maintain its observed trajectory, it must have a mass of at least 33 billion tons. That's the lower limit. If you assume solid density, that mass requires a diameter exceeding 5 kilometers. If the object is porous, like many comets, it would need to be even larger to reach that mass, but if it's compact and dense, it could be smaller. The uncertainty in size translates directly to uncertainty in density, which affects our understanding of what this thing is made of. A large, porous, icy body is consistent with a natural comet. A small, dense object with the same mass starts looking like something else. Not necessarily artificial, but at least unusual. Perhaps a fragment of a larger body that was shattered in a collision. Perhaps a captured planetesimal with a higher rock-to-ice ratio than typical comets. The possibilities multiply when the data is ambiguous. Rotation period is another piece of the puzzle. 3i Atlas rotates once every 16 hours, plus or minus about 3 minutes. That converts to 969.6 minutes. The number keeps coming back. Methuselah's age in the Bible. You can argue coincidence, and maybe it is. But when you divide that rotation period by Earth's exactial year of 256 days, you get 2.65457. That's within a fraction of a percent of the golden ratio squared, which is 2.618. Close enough that it's hard to ignore, but not exact enough to be definitive. David Sarita has built his entire hyperdimensional solar system model on these kinds of numerical relationships. Whether they mean anything or whether they're artifacts of human pattern seeking is the core question. Mathematics is discovered, not invented. According to Pleiadianists, the golden ratio exists in nature independent of human observation. If an intelligence wanted to encode a message in a way that any scientifically advanced species would recognize, using fundamental mathematical constants would be the obvious choice. But that assumes intention. It assumes design. And that's the leap most scientists are unwilling to make without far more evidence. The trajectory itself remains one of the strongest anomalies. 3 Atlas approaches within 5 degrees of the ecliptic plane, the imaginary disk in which the planets orbit. Random interstellar objects should arrive from random directions. The fact that this one aligns so closely with the planetary plane is statistically unlikely. Lowe calculated the probability at less than 1%. That doesn't prove anything by itself. Unlikely events happen, but it's another data point in the pile. The retrograde orbit adds to the strangeness. 3e Atlas is moving opposite to the direction planets orbit the Sun. Most objects in the solar system orbit in the same direction because they formed from a rotating disk of material. Retrograde orbits are rare and usually indicate either a capture event or an origin outside the system. For an interstellar object, retrograde isn't surprising. But combined with the low inclination, it creates a trajectory that's both unusual and tactically advantageous if you wanted to observe multiple planets without being easily detected. The velocity is consistent with interstellar origin. At discovery, 3i Atlas was moving at roughly 61 km/s relative to the Sun. That's faster than solar escape velocity at that distance, confirming it's not bound to our system. As it approaches perihelion, it accelerates to about 68 km due to gravitational pull. After perihelion, it will slow again as it climbs back out of the Sun's gravity well. If it follows a purely ballistic trajectory with no propulsion, it should exit the solar system at roughly the same speed it entered. Any significant deviation from that predicted exit velocity would be a red flag. The connection to the WOW signal is speculative but intriguing. In 1977, the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University detected a strong narrowband radio signal that lasted 72 seconds. It was so unusual that astronomer Jerry Ayen wrote, "Wow," in the margin of the printout. The signal appeared to come from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius near the star group Chis Sagittarii. It was never detected again, despite multiple follow-up observations. Lowe noted that 3 Atlas's trajectory, when traced backward, passes through a region of sky very close to where the WOW signal originated. The alignment isn't perfect, but it's within the margin of error given the uncertainties in both the signal's exact origin and the object's trajectory over interstellar distances. The chance of this being random is about %. Not impossible, but low enough to be noteworthy. If 3IE Atlas transmitted the WOW signal decades ago as it approached our solar system, the timeline works. The signal was detected in 1977. 3 Atlas is now here. Depending on its velocity and trajectory over the intervening decades, it could have been in the right position at the right time. But that requires assuming the object has been under intelligent control for at least 48 years, maintaining a course toward our system while announcing its approach with a radio burst. It's a huge assumption, but it would explain why the signal was never repeated. It wasn't a beacon, it was a one-time announcement. The alternative explanations for the WOW signal include a passing comet that happened to be in the beam, a terrestrial interference that somehow appeared exactly like an extraterrestrial signal, or a natural astrophysical phenomenon we don't yet understand. None of these are particularly satisfying. The comet explanation requires that the comet was outgassing hydrogen at exactly the frequency the telescope was tuned to, which is possible, but requires specific conditions. The interference explanation struggles with the fact that the signal had all the characteristics of an astronomical source, including the expected rise and fall in intensity as the telescope's beam swept across it. Adding it all together, the anti-solar tail, the nickel without iron, the carbon-heavy composition, the extreme water loss rate, the inactive early observations, the peculiar trajectory, the rotation period encoding, the WOW signal alignment. You get an object that doesn't quite fit anywhere. It's not like the comets in our solar system. It's not like 2 Eoros, the previous interstellar comet. It's not like 1IE. The Oumuamua, the first interstellar object which showed non-gravitational acceleration, but no visible outgassing. 3I Atlas is its own category. The scientific community is split. Most researchers are cautiously interpreting the data within known frameworks. Unusual composition check. Old outgassing behavior noted. Trajectory within statistical bounds barely. All explainable with creative applications of comet physics and formation theory. But a vocal minority led by Lowe and a handful of others are pointing out that at some threshold, explaining away becomes less convincing than considering alternatives. We're in a strange position. The data is good enough to know something is off, but not good enough to determine what. The object is too far away for direct imaging of surface features. Spectroscopy gives us chemical composition, but not structure. We can measure brightness and in phase, but not directly observe the nucleus. Everything is inference, models, statistical arguments. And in that ambiguity, both the skeptics and the believers find room to support their preferred explanations. What would it take to resolve this? A close approach mission, the kind Loeb has proposed, sending a probe to intercept 3 Atlas and image it from a few hundred kilometers away. We'd see the surface. We detect any geometric patterns, any anomalies in texture or reflectivity, any features that don't occur naturally. That mission doesn't exist. It would take years to plan and launch. By the time it could reach 3I Atlas, the object would be deep in interstellar space, unreachable. So we're left with remote observations and speculation. The anomalies pile up. Each one has a potential natural explanation. But the cumulative weight of them, the sheer number of things that are just slightly wrong, starts to bend probability into uncomfortable shapes. Either we're witnessing an extraordinarily unusual natural object that happens to display a dozen rare characteristics simultaneously, or we're looking at something that requires a different framework to understand. And the framework we've avoided for so long, the possibility of design, of intention, of intelligence, hovers at the edge of every conversation about 3 Atlas, acknowledged or not, technology and engineering, Lowe's alien probe hypothesis. There's a particular kind of courage required to put your name on a paper titled, "Is the Interstellar Object 3 Atlas Alien Technology?" Not the courage to have the idea. Lots of people have wild ideas after a few drinks, but the courage to formalize it, work through the mathematics, publish it with co-authors, and stand by it knowing the academic backlash that will follow. Avi Loeb has that courage or recklessness, depending on your perspective. And his paper with Adam Heibard and Adam Kraub posted to the Arsiv preprint server in July lays out a case that's equal parts rigorous orbital mechanics and science fiction speculation. The core argument is deceptively simple. If you were an extraterrestrial intelligence designing a reconnaissance probe to study a planetary system without being detected, you would make it look like a natural object. You'd give it a trajectory that appears ballistic, a composition that reads as icy or rocky, and behavior that mimics comets or asteroids. You'd only reveal yourself when necessary, either to complete your mission or when discovery becomes inevitable. 3. Atlas in this framework isn't an alien spaceship in the Hollywood sense. It's a Trojan horse, a surveillance platform disguised as cosmic debris. The trajectory analysis is where the paper gets interesting. Lowe and his co-authors calculated the delta 5, the change in velocity required for 3I Atlas to intercept various planets in our solar system from its current path. Delta 5 is the currency of spaceflight. Every maneuver costs velocity, and the more velocity you need to change, the more fuel or energy you require. For a probe arriving on an interstellar trajectory, minimizing delta 5 to reach targets of interest is critical. What they found is that 3I Atlas passes close enough to Venus, Mars, and Jupiter that relatively small velocity changes would allow intercepts. For Venus, the delta 5 required is less than 5 km/s before April and stays below 10 km/s through July. For Mars, it remains under 5 km/s through the end of July. For Jupiter, the intercept delta 5 is low, under 5 km/s all the way to November. Those are numbers achievable with chemical propulsion. The kind of rockets we build, not exotic physics, not antimatter drives, just thrust. Earth is the outlier. The delta 5 to intercept Earth from 3I Atlas's trajectory is always above 5 km and often significantly higher depending on timing. But here's the twist. Earth is in the habitable zone. If the probe is hostile per the dark forest hypothesis, you don't approach the inhabited planet directly. You approach its neighbors, you release subprobes, you study from a distance, and if you need to strike, you do so from a position where the target has minimal warning. The dark forest hypothesis frames the entire analysis. It's named after Liu Cixin's novel, but the concept has been discussed in astrobiology and SETI circles for years. The basic premise is that the universe is a competition for finite resources. Any civilization that reveals its location risks being targeted by others who see it as potential threat or a source of materials. The logical strategy is silence. You don't broadcast, you don't build obvious megastructures, and if you send probes to other systems, you make them stealthy. Lowe's paper explicitly states they're treating this as a pedagogical exercise, a thought experiment. But the mathematics is real. If 3I Atlas were designed as a dark forest probe, its trajectory would allow it to observe all the major terrestrial planets and deploy secondary craft to them with minimal fuel expenditure. The retrograde orbit moving opposite to planetary motion actually provides advantages. It increases relative velocity during flybys, allowing faster data collection before moving out of range. And the low inclination to the ecliptic means it stays in the plane where planets reside, maximizing observation opportunities. The timing of perihelion is crucial. 3I Atlas reaches its closest point to the Sun on October 29th when it's on the far side from Earth. If you wanted to perform a braking maneuver to enter a bound solar orbit, this is where you'd do it. The Sun eludes observation from the planet you're most interested in. Your engine burn, if you're using conventional propulsion that produces a visible plume, is hidden behind 200 million kilometers of fusing hydrogen. By the time you emerge in December, you're no longer on an escape trajectory. You're a resident. Lowe calculated that a velocity change of 30 to 40 km/s during perihelion would allow 3I Atlas to not only capture into solar orbit, but potentially redirect toward Earth, arriving as early as late November or early December. That's not a slow approach we'd see coming for months, that's weeks. And the first indication would be the object appearing in an unexpected position when it emerges from behind the sun already on a closing trajectory. The paper discusses the concept of a reverse solar oath maneuver in detail. For readers unfamiliar, the Orth effect is a counterintuitive result of orbital mechanics where a propulsion burn is most efficient when you're moving fastest. At perihelion, you're at maximum velocity due to falling into the sun's gravity well. A burn there gets amplified by the kinetic energy you already have, is why interplanetary missions often use gravity assists, flying close to planets to gain or shed velocity much more efficiently than burning fuel in deep space. A reverse Orth uses the same principle to slow down. If Third Atlas fired engines at perihelion, the deceleration would be magnified by the sun's gravity, allowing it to drop from an escape trajectory into a captured orbit with much less fuel than the same maneuver would require elsewhere. It's elegant, and it's hidden. The paper notes that the optimal point for this maneuver is obscured from Earth's view, as if the geometry were designed to provide cover. Is that intentional, or are we seeing patterns where none exist? The paper doesn't claim certainty. It presents the scenario as possible, plausible even, but not proven. The language is careful. The authors acknowledge that the most likely explanation is still a natural comet, but they argue that dismissing the artificial hypothesis without investigation is premature. And they're right. If there's even a 5% chance, even a 1% chance that 3I is something other than a comet, the implications are so profound that caution should compel us to investigate, not dismiss. The public reaction to the paper was predictable. Mainstream science journalists largely ignored it or treated it as fringe speculation. Social media exploded. Reddit threads dissecting every paragraph, YouTube videos with alarming thumbnails. The conspiracy community embraced it as validation. The skeptical community mocked it as attention-seeking, and the scientific community by and large stayed silent, which is telling. Silence can mean the idea is too absurd to dignify with response, or it can mean the idea is uncomfortable enough that engaging with it risks professional reputation. Lowe is accustomed to this. His previous work on one Oumuamua, suggesting it might be an alien light sail, earned him both fame and scorn. He's been called a publicity hound, a pseudoscientist, and a modern Galileo, sometimes in the same article. His argument has always been that science should follow the data wherever it leads, not restrict inquiry to comfortable conclusions. If the data is anomalous, you propose anomalous explanations and test them. You don't suppress the hypothesis because it's weird. The problem, as Lowe's critics point out, is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Proposing that 3 Atlas is alien technology based on statistical improbabilities and orbital coincidences doesn't meet that bar. The evidence is suggestive, not definitive. It's a pile of anomalies, each individually explainable, adding up to something that feels significant but isn't conclusive. And in science, feeling isn't enough. But what would constitute extraordinary evidence? Lowe has proposed a checklist, a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is definitely natural and 10 is definitely technological. He ranks 3I Atlas at a 6. To move higher, you'd need detection of artificial signals, radio or optical. You'd need observation of non-gravitational acceleration that can't be explained by outgassing. You'd need high-resolution imagery, showing geometric structures or surface features inconsistent with natural formation. None of those have been detected yet. The Mars flyby was supposed to provide some of those answers. High resolution should have been sufficient to see large-scale structure. The spectroscopy from multiple orbiters should have given detailed composition data. But as we've covered, that data either hasn't been released or shows nothing conclusive. The images from ESA are low resolution, the NASA data is delayed, and the window for observation is now closed for months. Whether that's coincidence or design depends on how much you trust official explanations versus how suspicious you are of information control. Low scale is subjective, he admits that, but it's a framework for thinking about evidence that moves the conversation beyond binary. Is it aliens or not? It allows for gradations, it acknowledges uncertainty, and it provides benchmarks for what additional observations would move the needle. If 3i Atlas shows a delta V change after perihelion, it jumps to an 8 or 9 on the scale. If it broadcasts a signal, it's a 10. It just continues on a ballistic path and fades into the distance. It drops to a 3 or 4. Unusual, but probably natural. The engineering challenge of building an interstellar probe is worth considering. With our current technology, we can barely send spacecraft to the edge of the solar system. Voyager 1, launched in 1977, is now over 24 billion kilometers from Earth, traveling at about 17 kilometers relative to the Sun. At that speed, it would take roughly 75,000 years to reach the nearest star if it were aimed at one, which it isn't. To cross interstellar distances in a reasonable time frame requires either extremely long mission durations, generation ships, or probes that last millennia, or much higher velocities. 3i Atlas is moving at 61 km/s. If it maintained that speed, it would take roughly 20,000 years to travel 1 light year. The nearest stars to its origin point, assuming it came from the thick disk of the Milky Way, are likely dozens to hundreds of light years away. That implies either a mission duration of millions of years, which raises questions about power sources and degradation, or that it accelerated and decelerated multiple times, which requires enormous energy reserves unless it didn't travel from another star. There's a hypothesis, less discussed, but worth mentioning, that interstellar space is populated with orphaned objects ejected from planetary systems billions of years ago. These objects drift through the galaxy, occasionally passing through star systems by chance. If some of them were probes launched by civilizations long extinct, they might still be functioning, running on programmed instructions, observing and recording data they'll never transmit home because home no longer exists. 3 Atlas could be a ghost probe, a relic of a dead civilization completing a mission that lost its purpose eons ago. That's almost more melancholic than the dark forest scenario. At least with dark forest, there's intent, agency, threat. Ghost probes are just remnants, echoes of intelligence that once existed and now doesn't. They speak to the fragility of civilizations. The idea that even species advanced enough to achieve interstellar travel can collapse, be destroyed, or fade away. If we're finding their artifacts, it suggests the galaxy might be full of ruins. Archaeological sites we haven't learned to recognize yet because we're looking for active signals, not silent monuments. Lowe's paper doesn't explore that angle much. It focuses on the tactical scenario. If 3 Atlas is active and intelligent, what might it do next? The possibilities range from benign observation to active interference. It could deploy smaller probes to study Earth's biosphere, atmosphere, technological signatures. It could already be transmitting data back to its origin, updating its creators on what it's found. Or in the worst-case interpretation, it could be assessing threats and preparing a response. The idea that humanity might be viewed as a threat by an extraterrestrial intelligence is both absurd and terrifying. We can barely manage our own planet. We have no interstellar travel capability. We're not expanding into the galaxy. What threat could we pose? But from a sufficiently advanced perspective, threat isn't about current capability, it's about potential. Humanity went from first powered flight to landing on the moon in 66 years. From the first nuclear weapon to a global arsenal in decades, our technological growth is exponential. A civilization observing us might not care what we can do now. They care what we could do in 1,000 years, 10,000 years. And if the answer is we could become a competitor or a danger, then preemptive action becomes rational. This is the logic of the dark forest. You don't wait for the other hunter to become strong. You strike while they're weak. It's cold, ruthless, and it assumes a universe of zero-sum competition. But it's also potentially the reason we haven't detected obvious signs of widespread galactic civilizations. They're all hiding, or they've all been eliminated by those who hid better. Lowe doesn't advocate for panic. His position is that we should observe, gather data, and be prepared to respond if necessary. If 3 Atlas turns out to be natural, we've learned something about interstellar objects and planetary system formation. If it turns out to be artificial, we've gotten an early warning that we're not alone, and we need to start thinking seriously about how we present ourselves to a universe that might not be friendly. Either outcome is valuable. The criticism that Lowe is fear-mongering or seeking attention misses the point. The question isn't whether he's right about 3 Atlas specifically. The question is whether the possibility of extraterrestrial probes in our solar system is something we should prepare for, think about, and develop protocols around. Because if it's not 3 Atlas, it'll be the next interstellar object or the one after that. The Vera Rubin Observatory is about to come online, and it's going to find interstellar visitors at a rate of maybe several per year. If even a small fraction of them are artificial, we need frameworks for identifying them and deciding what to do. Ignoring the possibility because it's uncomfortable or because proposing it invites ridicule is not a strategy. It's denial. Physics and energy hyperdimensional solar system theory. Now we enter territory where mainstream science stops following and where the maps get strange. David Sarita's hyperdimensional solar system model isn't taught in universities. It won't appear in peer-reviewed astrophysics journals, but it makes predictions, numerical predictions, and some of those predictions align with observable data in ways that are difficult to dismiss as pure chance. Whether that means the model describes reality or whether it's a case of fitting enough parameters to make any pattern appear is the central question, and it's a question without a clear answer. The foundation of the model is the number 591, not 591, 591 exactly. This number Sarita claims represents the orbital period in Earth days of a hypothetical planet located between Mars and the asteroid belt. Planet 591 doesn't exist in any official catalog. No telescope has ever imaged it. But when you take 591 and divide it repeatedly by the golden ratio 1.618, you generate a sequence of numbers that correspond, sometimes with eerie accuracy, to the orbital periods of known planets and significant resonances in the solar system. Start with 5R91, do 5, you get 365.258. Music. Earth's actual sidereal orbital period is 365.56, 256 days. The match is within 0.02 days. That's not approximate, that's nearly exact. Coincidence? Maybe, but it's a very specific coincidence. Now, keep dividing. The next number down is 225.7, which is close to Venus's orbital period of 224.7 days. Then 139.5, and Mercury's orbit is 87.97 days, which doesn't match as cleanly, but is within a ratio relationship. The pattern continues outward as well. Multiply 591 by 5, and you start approaching the periods of the outer planets, though the matches become less precise as you move away from the central value. Sarah's claim is that 591 is the harmonic center of the solar system, the axis around which everything else rotates literally and figuratively. He connects this to the golden ratio because Fi appears throughout natural systems. The spiral of galaxies, the arrangement of leaves on a stem, the proportions of the human body. If the solar system is organized according to Fi, then finding a central frequency and scaling it by phi should reveal the structure. And to some extent, it does, at least for the inner planets. The outer planets are where the model gets more speculative. Sarita proposes 9 additional planets or orbital zones that correspond to angelic hierarchies described in Christian cosmology and in Dante's Paradiso. The seraphim, the cherubim, the thrones, the dominions, the virtues, the powers, the principalities, the archangels, and the angels. Each of these is assigned an orbital period, calculated by continuing the Phi division or multiplication sequence from 591. Most of these orbital periods don't correspond to any known objects, but some fall suspiciously close to resonances, orbital ratios where gravitational interactions create stable or unstable zones. Dante wrote the Paradiso around 1321. In it, he describes the cosmos as a series of 9 celestial spheres, each associated with a different order of angels and with specific virtues. Dante was working with the atomic model where Earth is at the center and everything revolves around it. But the numerical structure he describes as parallels to modern orbital mechanics when you adjust the reference frame. Sarita argues that Dante was encoding information possibly received through visionary experience, possibly through transmission from a non-human intelligence about the true structure of the solar system. And now, 704 years later, 3I Atlas appears and seems to be referencing the same framework. The Fibonacci numbers 58013 fit into this model. In the sequence Sarita builds, each number corresponds to a specific orbital zone. 5 is Earth. 8 is planet 591, the dominions. 13 is what he calls the virtues, another hypothetical planet or resonance zone further out. If 3i Atlas transmitted these numbers, it's saying, we understand your system. We know the hidden structure, and we're pointing to the key nodes, Earth, the inhabited world, 591, the central axis, and 13, the outer boundary of the inner system. Now, let's be clear about the problems with this model. First, there's no observational evidence for planet 591. If a planet existed between Mars and the asteroid belt with a 591-day orbit, we would have detected it. It would perturb the orbits of asteroids. It would be visible in infrared surveys. Its gravitational influence would show up in the trajectories of Mars missions. None of that has been observed, so either the planet doesn't exist, or it's somehow hidden, or the 591 refers not to a physical planet, but to a resonance, a gravitational harmonic that affects orbits without requiring a massive body. Second, the model requires accepting that Fi is a universal organizing principle, not just a mathematical curiosity that's a metaphysical claim, not a physical one. Physics uses F in specific contexts, like the geometry of pentagons or the properties of quasi-crystals, but it doesn't treat it as a fundamental constant like the speed of light or Planck's constant. Elevating Fi to that status requires philosophical assumptions about the nature of reality that aren't testable. Third, fitting data to models is easy if you allow yourself enough free parameters. So model has multiple layers of multiplication, division, rounding, and interpretation. With that much flexibility, you can make almost any set of numbers align with almost any other set if you're creative enough. This is the same critique leveled at numerology and Bible codes. If you search hard enough for patterns, you'll find them even in random data. That doesn't mean the patterns are meaningful. But, and this is a significant but, the model made a prediction inadvertently. Sarita developed the hyperdimensional framework before 3i was discovered. He published his ideas about 591 in the Fi sequence earlier in 2025 based on his interpretation of ancient texts and mathematical harmonics. When 3i appeared, its rotation period turned out to be 16.16 hours, which equals 969.6 minutes, and 969 happens to be the number of years Methuselah lived in the Bible. And when you divide 969 by Earth's orbital period, you get 2.654, which is incredibly close to 5 Oriors 2618. Sarita didn't predict that 3i Atlas would have this specific rotation period. But his model, which treats these kinds of numerical relationships as significant, suddenly had a new data point that fit. That's either an extraordinary coincidence or it's evidence that the model is capturing something real. The problem is, we can't distinguish between those two options without more data. One example isn't enough. You need multiple independent confirmations. If other interstellar objects show rotation periods or orbital characteristics that align with 5 base sequences, that would be compelling. If 3i Atlas is unique, it could just be chance. The connection to sacred architecture adds another layer. The Great Pyramid of Giza has a base perimeter of approximately 921 meters and a height of around 146 meters. The ratio of perimeter to height is close to 2 pi, which means the pyramid encodes the relationship between a circle's circumference and its radius. Some researchers argue this is intentional, that the builders understood pi and encoded it structurally. Others argue it's a natural consequence of the pyramid's slope angle and the use of convenient units of measurement. Same pattern, different interpretations. Sarita points out that the angles of the 3 pyramids at Giza, when extended as lines into the sky, point to specific regions of the ecliptic, where his proposed hyperdimensional planets would be visible if they existed. The Great Pyramid's angle is 51 kulon, 51 minutes. Khufu's second pyramid and Manao's third pyramid have slightly different angles. Together, they form a map of the sky that, according to Sarita, encodes the positions of hidden celestial bodies. This is not accepted by mainstream Egyptology, which generally interprets the pyramids as tombs and the angles as architectural choices related to structural stability. But if you're willing to entertain the idea that ancient civilizations had contact with, or knowledge from non-human intelligences, then encoding astronomical data in monumental architecture makes sense. It's a way to preserve information across millennia. Stone lasts, oral traditions fade, writing systems change, but a pyramid aligned to cardinal directions, built with geometric precision, carries its message forward through time to anyone capable of reading it. And if 3 Atlas is arriving at Great Pyramid angle to Earth on December 25th, that's either the universe has a sense of drama or someone is following a script written long ago. Richard C. Hoagland, who has spent decades arguing that structures on Mars and the Moon show signs of artificial origin, has weighed in on 3's as well. Hoagland's work is controversial, often dismissed as pseudoscience, but he brings a background in science communication, having worked with NASA during the Apollo era. His analysis of the October 13th date, the 108th anniversary of Fatima, hinges on harmonic resonance. 108. 2 is 216. 216, 2 is 432. 32 Hz is claimed by some researchers to be a natural tuning frequency, more in harmony with human physiology and natural vibrations than the modern concert pitch of 440 Hz. The shift from 432 to 440 as the standard A note happened in the 20th century, driven by factors ranging from orchestral preference to international standardization efforts. Whether 432 is objectively better or whether it's a preference is debated, but the number appears in multiple contexts. 432,000 is the number of years in the Kali Yuga cycle of Hindu cosmology. 432 is also related to the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes roughly 20 years to complete one cycle. Divide that by 60, the ancient Sumerian base number system, and you get numbers in the 400s. Hoagland suggests that whoever or whatever is behind 3i Atlas understands these cycles, these harmonics, and is timing events to resonate with them. The Fatima anniversary, the perihelion date, the Christmas alignment, none of it is random. It's a composed piece, a symphony where each note is placed for maximum effect. Whether that's true or whether we're imposing narrative onto chaos is impossible to say, but the aesthetic is compelling. If you're going to announce your presence, doing it through synchronicity and sacred timing is more elegant than broadcasting a simple radio signal. The mathematical relationship Sarita has identified can't all be dismissed. The rotation period of 3i Atlas matching the golden ratio squared within a fraction of a percent is odd. The fact that dividing 591 by 5 gets you Earth's orbital period almost exactly is odd. The Fibonacci sequence appearing in alleged light pulses on a historically significant date is odd. Any one of these could be noise, but together they form a constellation of oddness that demands either a unifying explanation or an acceptance that the universe is weirder and more interconnected than materialist science allows. This is where the conversation often breaks down. Skeptics demand physical mechanisms, show us the planet, measure the signal, provide reproducible data. Sarita's model doesn't offer that. It offers correlation, numerology, historical analysis, and metaphysical speculation. From a strict empirical standpoint, it's not science, but from a broader perspective, one that includes the history of ideas and the possibility that ancient cultures encoded astronomical knowledge in myth and architecture, it's at least worth considering. The danger is confirmation bias. Once you start looking for fire relationships, you find them everywhere. The human mind is exceptional at pattern recognition to the point where we see patterns that don't exist. Pareidolia, seeing faces in clouds or on Mars, is a well-demented phenomenon. Numerological thinking can become a trap where every number confirms your theory because you find a way to make it fit. The challenge is distinguishing genuine signal from noise, and that requires rigor that models like Sarah's often lack. Yet if 3i Atlas does something in December, if it deviates from a ballistic trajectory, if it shows structure, if it confirms any of the predictions made by those treating it as potentially artificial, then models like Sarita's who would try to find meaning in the anomalies will suddenly look more credible. And if it doesn't, if 3i Atlas fades into the distance as just another interstellar chunk of ice, Then the hyperdimensional solar system model joins the long list of interesting ideas that didn't pan out. But the beauty of science, real science, is that we get to find out. The object is still there. The observations will continue, and the data will either support or refute the wild hypothesis. That's how it should work, even if the hypothesis make people uncomfortable. Biology and genetics. Could it seed life? There's a hypothesis in astrobiology that doesn't get enough attention in popular discussions, probably because it's simultaneously elegant and disturbing. It's called panspermia. The idea that life doesn't originate independently on every planet, but spreads through space on comets, asteroids, and interstellar objects. If this is true, then 3i Atlas isn't just a visitor, it's a delivery vehicle, and what it's carrying might be more significant than any signal it could transmit. Let's start with the age estimates. Multiple studies trying to trace 3i Atlas's trajectory backward through the galaxy suggest it's been traveling for a very long time. The conservative estimate is 3 billion years. The upper estimate pushes to 14 billion years, which would make it older than the solar system, possibly dating back to the early universe when the first generation of stars were seeding the galaxy with heavy elements. If 3 Atlas formed 14 billion years ago, it witnessed the Milky Way's adolescence. It drifted through clouds of gas and dust that would eventually collapse into stars and planets. It was ancient when Earth was forming. What does age mean for biology? If the object is that old and has been preserving frozen material in its interior, it could contain organic compounds from an era of galactic chemistry we can't sample any other way. Early stars had different metallicity, different abundances of elements. The building blocks of life, amino acids, nucleotides, lipid membranes, might have formed under conditions that no longer exist. 3 Atlas could be a time capsule carrying primordial organic chemistry that predates anything on Earth. The carbon dioxide dominance in 3i Atlas's composition supports this. Carbon dioxide ice forms at lower temperatures than water ice. If this object originated in the cold outer regions of its natal star system, or even in interstellar space itself, it would preferentially accumulate carbon compounds. Carbon is the backbone of organic chemistry. The fact that 3i Atlas is spewing carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and cyanide, all carbon-bearing molecules, suggests it's rich in the raw materials life uses. Cyanide gets a bad reputation because it's toxic to humans, but in prebiotic chemistry, hydrogen cyanide is essential. It's a precursor to amino acids through the strier synthesis. It polymerizes into adenine, one of the nucleotide bases in DNA and RNA. The Miller-Urey experiment, which simulated early Earth's atmosphere and produced amino acids from simple chemicals and electricity, relied on cyanide chemistry. If 3i Atlas is releasing cyanide, it's releasing one of the key ingredients for life's origin. Now the objection is that space is harsh, radiation, vacuum, temperature extremes. Organic molecules would degrade over millions of years, let alone billions. That's true for molecules on the surface, but the interior of a comet is protected. Met ice and rock shield the core from cosmic rays. Temperature inside stays stable, well below freezing. Preserving chemical structures, we found amino acids in meteorites. The Murchison meteorite famously contained over 70 different amino acids, some of which don't exist in terrestrial biology. Those molecules survived the meteorite's formation, its journey through space, and its fiery entry into Earth's atmosphere. If amino acids can survive that, they can survive inside a comet for eons. The OSIRIS-REx mission to the asteroid Bennu confirmed that asteroids carry the building blocks of life. When the sample was returned to Earth and analyzed, it contained most of the amino acids necessary for biology. Bennu is a rubble pile asteroid that's been orbiting the Sun for billions of years, getting baked and irradiated. Yet, the organics persisted. 3i Atlas coming from interstellar space and spending most of its time in the deep freeze, far from any star, would preserve organics even better. This brings us to the panspermia mechanism. Comets impact planets. When they do, some material survives the impact and mixes with the local environment. If that material contains preformed organic molecules, or more speculatively, hardy microorganisms, It seeds the planet. Earth might have been seeded this way. Mars might have been. Venus before it became a hellscape might have been. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn, which have subsurface oceans, could still be receiving regular deliveries of organic material from impacts. 3 Atlas isn't going to hit Earth. Its trajectory keeps it far away. But if it were to fragment, if pieces broke off due to thermal stress or tidal forces, those fragments could become their own objects with slightly altered trajectories. Some might eventually intersect Earth's orbit, not now, but in the future. Or they could impact other bodies in the solar system. If even one fragment lands in a hospitable environment, and if it carries viable biological material, you've just introduced extraterrestrial life. The definition of viable is key. Most panspermia scenarios don't require active reproducing organisms. They require chemical precursors, organic molecules that can kickstart a biogenesis, the transition from chemistry to biology. But there's a more radical version of panspermia called lithopanspermia, which proposes that actual microbes dormant but alive travel through space inside rocks and ice. This requires organisms capable of surviving extreme conditions, and we know such organisms exist on Earth. Tardigrades can survive the vacuum of space. Bacterial spores can remain viable for millions of years in dormancy. If Earth life can do this, it's plausible that life elsewhere developed the same capability. Avibe has proposed that future missions should attempt to intercept interstellar objects and sample them directly, not with flybys, but with landing missions that drill into the surface and extract material for analysis. The goal would be to search for organic compounds and ambitiously for any signs of biological activity or structures that suggest life. If an interstellar object contained extraterrestrial microbes, even dead ones, it would revolutionize biology. We'd have a second example of life, proof that it's not unique to Earth, and if the biochemistry was similar to ours, it would support panspermia. If it were radically different, it would suggest independent origins, which raises its own questions about how common life is. 3 Atlas is too far away and moving too fast for a landing mission with current technology. But future interstellar visitors might be intercepted. The Vera Rubin Observatory will find objects earlier in their approach, giving us more time to plan missions. If an interstellar comet is detected a year out instead of a month out, we could potentially launch a fast flyby probe or even a sample return mission if the trajectory is favorable. The science return from such a mission would be immense. The darker side of panspermia is the possibility of harmful biology. If life can spread through space, so can pathogens. Imagine an interstellar object that fragmented and one piece landed on Earth, and it carried microbes that are biochemically compatible enough with terrestrial life to interact, but foreign enough to be dangerous. Extraterrestrial plague. This sounds like science fiction, and it probably is. The chances of alien biochemistry being compatible enough with Earth biology to cause infection, but different enough to evade immune systems, is vanishingly small. But it's not zero. There are protocols for planetary protection, rules designed to prevent contamination of other worlds with Earth life and vice versa. Missions to Mars are sterilized to avoid introducing terrestrial microbes. Sample return missions from Mars or asteroids are carefully contained and analyzed in clean rooms. But those protocols assume we control the situation, that we're bringing samples back deliberately. If an interstellar object fragments and pieces land on Earth naturally, there's no containment. It's already here. And if it's carrying something biological, we're exposed. The likelihood of this is low. Most biologists think the biochemical differences between Earth life and any hypothetical alien life would be so great that there'd be no interaction. Earth microbes wouldn't be able to metabolize alien organic molecules and vice versa. They'd be chemically inert to each other. Like trying to run gasoline in a diesel engine. It doesn't work because the systems aren't compatible. But we don't know that for sure. We've never analyzed extraterrestrial life. We're speculating based on the one example we have, which is a sample size of 1. If 3 Atlas is carrying anything biological, it's more likely to be chemical fossils than living organisms. Organic molecules that once were part of life but are now inert. Those would still be incredibly valuable scientifically. They'd tell us about the chemistry of life in another star system. what elements were available, what pathways were used, whether the same solutions to the problems of metabolism and replication were found. Even negative results, finding that 3/3 Atlas has no organic chemistry at all, would be informative. It would tell us that the formation conditions were hostile to complex carbon molecules, which narrows the range of environments where life can start. The role of interstellar objects in distributing life across the galaxy is an open question. If panspermia is real, then life might not need to originate de novo on every planet. It could start once somewhere and then spread as comets, and asteroids get ejected from that system and eventually land in others. Over billions of years, a single Genesis event could populate an entire galaxy. That would make life common, but also related. Every instance of life in the Milky Way could share a common ancestor, not through evolution on a single planet, but through propagation across space. This has implications for the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. If life is seeded by panspermia, then the emergence of intelligence might follow similar timelines across many worlds. You could have waves of intelligence, cohorts of species that developed within the same few 100 million-year window, because they all started from seeds distributed in the same epoch. That could explain why we haven't detected signals. Maybe we're in an early wave and the galaxy is mostly empty of advanced civilizations because life is still getting started. Or maybe we're in a late wave and everyone else already rose and fell, leaving only ruins and dormant probes like 3 Atlas. Remote viewing claims mentioned in social media posts around 3 Atlas speculate that it's carrying microbial life and plans to drop it on Earth. This is almost certainly fantasy, but it taps into a primal fear. The idea that something from the sky could rain down and change life on Earth is ancient. Meteors were seen as omens. Comets were feared as harbingers of plague and war. Modern science mostly dismissed those fears as superstition. But panspermia suggests they might have been onto something, not in a mystical sense, but in a literal one. Objects from space can carry biological material. It's just that most of the time that material is either destroyed on entry or so foreign that it doesn't interact with the existing biosphere. The ultimate test for 3I Atlas's biological potential would be spectroscopy, looking for specific biosignatures. Molecules like methane and oxygen together in the same spectrum would be unusual since they react and destroy each other unless continuously replenished by life. Chlorophyll or other pigments that absorb specific wavelengths of light for photosynthesis would be a smoking gun. We haven't detected anything like that, and we probably won't. But searching is how science advances. You look for the unexpected, and occasionally you find it. If 3 Atlas were to show even a hint of biological activity, the response would be immediate and intense. Every telescope would turn toward it. Funding for interception missions would materialize overnight. The paradigm would shift. Until then, the question remains hypothetical. Could 3 Atlas seed life? In principle, yes. It has the chemistry, it has the age, it has the protective ice shell. Whether it actually carries viable biological material is unknown and will likely remain unknown unless we sample it. But the fact that we can even ask the question seriously that panspermia is a legitimate hypothesis discussed in peer-reviewed journals shows how far our understanding has come. The universe is not sterile. It's full of organic chemistry, complex molecules, and the potential for biology to spread far beyond its origin. 3 Atlas is part of that story. Whether it's carrying life or not, it's a messenger from another part of the galaxy. And the message is that the building blocks are everywhere, waiting for the right conditions to assemble into something that replicates, evolves, and eventually asks questions about where it came from. Medicine and neuroscience, the psychology of disclosure. Information control during periods of uncertainty reveals more about human institutions than it does about the phenomena being controlled. The pattern playing out with 3I Atlas isn't new. It's the same structure we've seen with every high strangeness event that crosses from fringe speculation into mainstream awareness. Initial discovery, excitement, official reassurances that downplay significance, data delays, leaked information that may or may not be credible. public fragmentation into believer and skeptic camps, and then slow erosion of trust in official narratives regardless of their accuracy. This cycle is so predictable that it's almost a playbook, and understanding why it happens requires looking at the neuroscience of belief and the sociology of information gatekeeping. Start with the government shutdown timing. On October 1st, over 15,000 NASA employees were furloughed due to congressional budget impasse. 2 days later, 3I Atlas made its closest approach to Mars, the best observation window for high-resolution imaging and spectroscopy. The shutdown means reduced staffing, delayed data processing, and minimal public communication. From a bureaucratic standpoint, this is unfortunate, but not conspiratorial. Shutdowns happen. They disrupt operations. But from a public trust standpoint, the timing creates suspicion. The human brain is wired to detect agency. This is an evolutionary adaptation. When our ancestors heard rustling in the bushes, assuming it was a predator and being wrong was less costly than assuming it was wind and being wrong. We over-attribute intentionality. We see patterns and infer design, even in random events. This is called hyperactive agency detection, and it's why conspiracy theories are so persistent. When something significant happens and official explanations feel inadequate, the brain fills the gap with narratives that involve deliberate action. The shutdown wasn't random bad luck. It was timed to coincide with the Mars flyby to prevent data release. Whether that's true is almost secondary to the fact that it's plausible, and plausibility is enough for the brain to latch onto. The White House question is another data point. When Stephen Miller, then Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, was asked on national television whether the president had been briefed on 3I Atlas, the question itself signaled elevation. Objects that warrant presidential briefings are objects of strategic importance. The fact that the question was public, not leaked, means someone in the media considered it legitimate to ask. That shifts 3I Atlas from astronomical curiosity to potential policy issue. And once something becomes a policy issue, information flow changes. Decisions get made about what to release, when, and to whom. This is where the psychology gets complicated. Most scientists operating in the 33rd Atlas research community are not part of coordinated cover-up. They're analyzing data, writing papers, going through peer review. The slowness is structural, not intentional. But perception doesn't track structure. When data that should be publicly available according to NASA's own protocols is delayed for weeks with vague explanations, and when that delay happens during a period where alternative narratives are gaining traction on social media, trust erodes. It doesn't matter if the delay is due to understaffing or technical issues, the effect is the same. Absence of information gets filled with speculation. Social media amplifies this exponentially. Reddit threads, X posts, TikTok videos, they create echo chambers where like-minded people reinforce each other's beliefs. The 3 Atlas subreddit, which barely existed in July, now has thousands of active members. They're sharing observations, analyzing images, dissecting every statement from officials, and constructing elaborate theories about what's really happening. Some of it is insightful, some of it is noise. But collectively, it represents a distributed cognitive process where the crowd is trying to make sense of incomplete information. This is both valuable and dangerous. Valuable because sometimes crowdsourced analysis catches things experts miss. Astrophotographer Simeon Schmaus, processing Perseverance rover images and potentially spotting 3I Atlas before any official release, is an example. The crowd has resources, time, and motivation that individual researchers don't. Dangerous because, without editorial filters, misinformation spreads as fast as accurate information, sometimes faster. The Fibonacci pulse claim by David Sarita is a case study. It appeared, went viral, and now exists in a state where it's neither confirmed nor debunked. People who want it to be true cite it. People who think it's nonsense ignore it, and the truth remains unclear. The split between believers and skeptics isn't random. Research in cognitive psychology shows that belief in anomalous phenomena correlates with certain personality traits and cognitive styles. People high in openness to experience are more likely to entertain unconventional ideas. People high in pattern recognition are more likely to see connections others miss, but also more likely to see connections that aren't there. The need for cognitive closure, the desire to have definitive answers rather than live with ambiguity, drives people toward whichever explanation feels most satisfying, whether it's "this is definitely a comet" or "this is definitely an alien probe." Scientists, contrary to the stereotype of pure rationality, are human and subject to the same biases. Once you've publicly stated a position, cognitive dissonance makes it uncomfortable to change that position, even when new evidence appears. Jav Lobo is on record suggesting three eyelash could be artificial. His critics are on record dismissing that as sensationalism. Both sides now have reputational stakes. If Low is right, his critics look foolish. If he's wrong, he's confirmed as a pseudoscientist in the eyes of many. This dynamic makes objective evaluation harder because egos are involved. The phrase, "a zero drought" and similar disaster framing appearing in unrelated scientific papers about water resources, has primed the public for crisis thinking. When that mindset encounters an ambiguous astronomical event, it's easy to map existential threat onto it. Remote viewing posts on X claiming 3i Atlas is pulling energy from its surroundings, glowing brightly, preparing to drop microbial life on Earth. These are fantasy, but they're psychologically resonant fantasies. They tap into deep archetypes, the visitor from the sky, the herald of change, the end of the world as we know it. Carl Jung wrote about UFOs in the 1950s, not as literal craft, but as psychological phenomena. He suggested they represent projections of the collective unconscious during times of cultural anxiety. Whether UFOs are real in a physical sense is separate from their psychological reality. They symbolize something: the unknown, the other, the possibility of transcendence or destruction. 3 Atlas fits that archetype perfectly. It's from outside, it's mysterious, and it arrived at a moment when the world feels unstable. Climate change, political polarization, technological disruption. The decision about how to handle potential non-human contact is not primarily scientific. It's political, social, psychological. If 3i Atlas were definitively shown to be artificial, the response wouldn't be, "Let's study it calmly." Quote 4. "We're on our way. We've been watching you. Don't be afraid. We're going to be there soon." The Post also claimed the probe is already in contact with senior global leadership, communication that hasn't been shared with the public. This spread rapidly, thousands of shares, YouTube videos, breathless headlines. It's almost certainly false. No credible source has confirmed it. The original post provides no verifiable details, no names of scientists, no links to papers or press releases. It has all the hallmarks of creative fiction designed to go viral. But here's why it gained traction. The message is psychologically perfect. It addresses fear. Don't be afraid. It confirms suspicion. We've been watching you. And it promises imminent contact. We're going to be there soon. Those three elements, reassurance, validation, and urgency, are exactly what people primed by months of speculation want to hear. Whether it's true is less important than whether it feels true. The claim about communication with senior global leadership taps into another deep vein of conspiracy thought, the idea that governments know more than they're telling, that there's a secret group with access to information the public doesn't have. This is disclosure with a capital D. The theory that extraterrestrial contact has already occurred and is being managed quietly to avoid panic. In this framework, public statements denying anything unusual are expected. Of course, they deny it. Confirming it would cause economic collapse, religious crisis, mass hysteria. So they prepare in secret, brief world leaders, coordinate responses, and feed the public a controlled narrative. Is this happening with 3i Atlas? Probably not. But the fact that Stephen Miller was publicly asked whether the president had been briefed shows the idea has reached mainstream discourse. That question wouldn't have been asked on national television if it were obviously absurd. The journalist who asked it thought it was legitimate. That shift from fringe to mentionable is significant. It means the Overton window, the range of acceptable political discussion, has moved. Extraterrestrial contact is now within the bounds of serious consideration, at least for some audiences. Carrie Casty and Project Camelot have been covering 3 Atlas extensively, framing it as the return of the Anunnaki. For those unfamiliar, the Anunnaki deities in ancient Sumerian mythology, often interpreted by alternative historians like Zecharia Sitchin as extraterrestrial beings who visited Earth in antiquity and genetically engineered humans. Sitchin's work, based on his interpretations of ununiform texts, claimed the Anunnaki came from a planet called Nibiru, with a highly elliptical orbit that brings it into the inner solar system every few thousand years. Cast's claim is that 3i Atlas is either Nibiru itself or a craft associated with it, and that the entity Marduk, chief god of Babylon and associated with Jupiter in later mythology, is returning. This ties into prophecy beliefs, the idea that ancient texts predicted this return and that we're now witnessing it. David Sarita's mathematical analysis is cited as proof. The orbital harmonics, the fire relationships, the biblical numerology, all of it supposedly confirms that 3i Atlas is following a predetermined course known to ancient civilizations. From a mythological standpoint, it's a rich narrative. From an evidentiary standpoint, his layers of speculation stacked on speculation. Satan's translations are not accepted by mainstream Asiologists who argue he mistranslated key terms and imposed his extraterrestrial interpretation onto texts that have more mundane explanations. Nibiru, if it existed, would have gravitational effects we detect. No planet-sized body with an eccentric orbit periodically disrupting the inner solar system has been observed. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, and for believers, the fact that mainstream science dismisses Sitchin's work is further evidence of cover-up. The alien mothership-carrying Gardner probes is a more refined version of the panspermia hypothesis. Instead of accidental distribution of organic molecules, this theory proposes intentional seeding. 3i Atlas arrives, deploys smaller probes. Those probes land on planets and moons, and they either plant life directly or prepare environments for future habitation. Lowe's paper mentioned the possibility of 3 Atlas behaving like a dandelion dispersing seeds. The imagery is evocative. A cosmic flower spreading genetic information across star systems. This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. If a civilization wanted to expand but couldn't travel at relativistic speeds, sending automated Gardner probes makes sense. They travel slowly, take centuries or millennia to reach targets, but once there, they terraform, seed, and prepare worlds. By the time the civilization develops faster travel, the new worlds are ready. It's a long game strategy. Whether any civilization would commit to such a plan, given the timescales and uncertainties, is debatable, but it's technically possible with technology only slightly beyond ours. The November-December invasion countdown on Reddit is collective anxiety manifesting as countdown clock. Multiple threads track days until 3i Atlas emerges from behind the sun. The framing is apocalyptic. Will it have maneuvered? Will it have deployed probes? Will Earth be targeted? This is driven partly by Lowe's calculations about potential Earth intercept windows and partly by the dark forest framing. If 3i Atlas is hostile, late November or early December is when we'd find out. The countdown creates communal tension, a shared experience of waiting for a reveal. Psychologically, this is similar to end-times cults that predict specific dates for apocalypse or rapture. When the date passes without incident, believers either abandon the theory or rationalize. The date was wrong, but the concept is still valid. Or it did happen, but spiritually, not physically. The flexibility of interpretive frameworks allows almost any outcome to be accommodated without falsifying the core belief. If 3 Atlas does nothing unusual, the response will be it's waiting, or it's already completed its mission, or the real event was hidden from us. The theory becomes unfalsifiable, which removes it from scientific discourse, but doesn't diminish its psychological power. Mystery objects in Earth orbit not listed as spacecraft is a recurring claim. Amateur astronomers using tracking software sometimes spot objects that aren't in public satellite catalogs. This could be classified military satellites, space debris that hasn't been cataloged yet, or errors in observation. But in the context of 3i Atlas, it's interpreted as probes. If 3i Atlas deployed subcraft months ago before we were paying close attention, those craft could now be in Earth orbit observing us. There's no hard evidence for this. Satellite tracking communities are thorough, and if there were genuinely anomalous objects, they'd be documented and analyzed. But the claim persists because it's hard to prove a negative. How do you prove there isn't a cloaked probe in orbit? The Vandenberg Air Force Base, Red Square UFO from October 14, 2003, 22 years before the Fatima anniversary date in 2025, is another numerological link Sarita has made. On that date, multiple witnesses, including military personnel, reported seeing a massive red square object in the sky near Vandenberg. It was never officially explained. Connecting it to 3 Atlas requires believing that the same intelligence has been operating near Earth for decades, occasionally revealing itself, and that the 22-year gap is significant. In Sarita's framework, it relates to harmonic frequencies and Fatima symbolism. Since October 14th is one day after October 13th, this is numerology at its most flexible. Any two events can be connected if you allow enough degrees of freedom. But for people already convinced there's a pattern, each new connection reinforces belief. It's a web of meaning where every thread supports every other thread. Pulling one thread doesn't collapse the web, it just tightens elsewhere. This makes the theory resilient but also untestable. If everything is connected, then nothing can falsify the connection. The Jeffrey Epstein files distraction theory is more cynical. It posits that the 3 Atlas story was floated by intelligence agencies to divert public attention from politically damaging revelations. The timing is suspicious. 3 Atlas discovered in July. Epstein-related documents released around the same time. Major news cycles competing for attention. In this view, astronomical phenomena are tools of information warfare. Got a story you want buried? Released something exotic to dominate headlines. Aviv addressed this directly, pointing out that 3 Atlas is a physical object observable by anyone with a decent telescope. It exists independently of terrestrial politics. The fact that its discovery coincided with other news is just that, coincidence. But the theory persists because it fits a worldview where nothing is random, where powerful actors manipulate everything, where the surface narrative always hides a deeper truth. It's exhausting to live in that worldview, but it's also seductive. It makes you feel informed, awake, while everyone else is asleep. Project Bluebeam is the granddaddy of fake alien invasion theories. Originally proposed by journalist Serge Monast in the 1990s, it claims that global elites plan to stage a false alien contact event using holograms, advanced aircraft, and media manipulation. The goal is to create a common threat that justifies world government, centralized control, and suppression of individual freedoms. In the Bluebeam scenario, 3i Atlas would be part of the setup. A real object, but one whose nature is being misrepresented to prepare the public for a staged reveal. When the fake aliens appear, people will believe it because they have been primed by months of speculation about 3 Atlas. This theory requires an almost omnipotent level of coordination among global powers, which is implausible given how fractious international relations actually are. But it resonates because it explains anomalies. Why are governments being evasive about 3 Atlas? Because they're managing the narrative for Bluebeam. Why is data being delayed? To allow time for fabrication. Any evidence can be incorporated. Real anomalies are part of the script. Lack of anomalies means the script is working its closed loop. The belief that we're being prepared for stage disclosure through incremental revelations has some merit, though, even without invoking Bluebeam. If governments did have evidence of extraterrestrial life or technology, sudden full disclosure would be disruptive. A gradual process hinting, allowing speculation, releasing ambiguous data. This builds tolerance. By the time official confirmation comes, it's anticlimactic. Everyone already half believed it. This is how normalization works. The fringe becomes mainstream not through definitive proof, but through repeated exposure. 3 Atlas, regardless of what it actually is, functions as a normalization event for the idea that interstellar objects might be artificial. Whether that normalization is accidental or intentional is the question. Occam's razor suggests accidental. 3i Atlas is a comet. It has weird properties because comets are variable and people are reading too much into it. But Occam's razor is a heuristic, not a law. The simplest explanation is often, but not always, correct. And in situations involving intelligence, whether human or non-human, simple explanations can miss deception. If you're trying to hide, you make your probe look like a comet. If you're trying to manage public reaction, you release data slowly. Both strategies make the simple explanation, it's just a comet and the government is just slow, appear correct, even when they're not. The difficulty is distinguishing genuine conspiracy from pattern seeking and randomness. Some conspiracies are real. MK Ultra, Watergate, Tuskegee experiments, these happened. Governments and organizations do coordinate in secret, manipulate information, and lie. But most conspiracy theories are wrong. The challenge is developing filters that catch real conspiracies without falling for false ones. It requires skepticism in both directions. Skeptical of official narratives, but also skeptical of alternative narratives. Most people pick a side and stick with it. Trust authorities always, or distrust authorities always. Neither strategy is optimal. With 3i Atlas, the optimal strategy is wait for more data while entertaining multiple possibilities. It's probably a comet. It might be artificial. It could be something in between, a natural object with properties we don't yet understand. The wilder theories, Anunnaki, blue beam, alien motherships. They're less likely, but not impossible. Assigning rough probabilities helps. Comet 90%, artificial probe 5%, exotic natural phenomenon 4%, elaborate hoax or scop sal. As new data arrives, adjust. If 3 Atlas maneuvers, artificial jumps to 80%. If it fragments naturally, comet goes to 99%. This keeps your thinking flexible without abandoning judgment entirely. And right now, with the object hidden behind the sun and data delayed, flexibility is the most honest position anyone can hold. The Curious Corner. Wildest conspiracy theories. Every major anomalous event attracts a constellation of theories that range from scientifically plausible to utterly bizarre. 3e Atlas is no exception. In fact, the sheer variety of speculation surrounding this object might be unprecedented. We've got ancient alien gods, biblical prophecy, government cover-ups, AI-translated messages from space, staged alien invasions, and theories that connect it to everything from Knights Templar to the Philadelphia experiment. Some of this is serious speculation from people trying to make sense of anomalous data. Some of it is creative fiction, and some of it might uncomfortably touch on truths that a stranger than the dismissive mainstream is willing to consider. Let's start with the Chilean scientist's claim that went viral in late September. According to posts on multiple platforms, scientists in Chile using Atlas telescope data and AI analysis supposedly decoded a message from 3i Atlas. The message, when translated, allegedly read, "Eidoi quote Faro 5." The post also claimed the probe is already in contact with senior global leadership communication that hasn't been shared with the public. This spread rapidly, thousands of shares, YouTube videos, breathless headlines. It's almost certainly false. No credible source has confirmed it. The original post provides no verifiable details, no names of scientists, no links to papers or press releases. It has all the hallmarks of creative fiction designed to go viral. But here's why it gained traction. The message is psychologically perfect. It addresses fear. Don't be afraid. It confirms suspicion. We've been watching you, and it promises imminent contact. We're going to be there soon. Those three elements, reassurance, validation, and urgency, are exactly what people primed by months of speculation want to hear. Whether it's true is less important than whether it feels true. The claim about communication with senior global leadership taps into another deep vein of conspiracy thought. The idea that governments know more than they're telling, that there's a secret group with access to information the public doesn't have. This is disclosure with a capital D. The theory that extraterrestrial contact has already occurred and is being managed quietly to avoid panic. In this framework, public statements denying anything unusual are expected. Of course, they deny it. confirming it would cause economic collapse, religious crisis, mass hysteria. So, they prepare, in secret, brief world leaders, coordinate responses, and feed the public a controlled narrative. Is this happening with 3i Atlas? Probably not. But the fact that Stephen Miller was publicly asked whether the president had been briefed shows the idea has reached mainstream discourse. That question wouldn't have been asked on national television if it were obviously absurd. The journalist who asked it thought it was legitimate. That shift from fringe to mentionable is significant. It means the Overton window, the range of acceptable political discussion, has moved. Extraterrestrial contact is now within the bounds of serious consideration, at least for some audiences. Carrie Cassidy and Project Camelot have been covering 3i Atlas extensively, framing it as the return of the Anunnaki. For those unfamiliar, the Anunnaki are deities in ancient Sumerian mythology, often interpreted by alternative historians like Zachariah Sitton as extraterrestrial beings who visited Earth in antiquity and genetically engineered humans. Seaton's work, based on his interpretations of ununiform texts, claimed the Anunnaki came from a planet called Nibiru, with a highly elliptical orbit that brings it into the inner solar system every few thousand years. Cassid's claim is that 3 Atlas is either Nibiru itself or a craft associated with it, and that the entity Marduk, chief god of Babylon and associated with Jupiter in later mythology, is returning. This ties into prophecy beliefs, the idea that ancient texts predicted this return and that we're now witnessing it. David Sarita's mathematical analysis is cited as proof. The orbital harmonics, the fire relationships, the biblical numerology, all of it supposedly confirms that 3i Atlas is following a predetermined course known to ancient civilizations. From a mythological standpoint, it's a rich narrative. From an evidentiary standpoint, it's layers of speculation stacked on speculation. Seaton's translations are not accepted by mainstream Asiologists, who argue he mistranslated key terms and imposed his extraterrestrial interpretation onto texts that have more mundane explanations. Nibiru, if it existed, would have gravitational effects we detect. No planet-sized body with an eccentric orbit periodically disrupting the inner solar system has been observed. But absence of evidence is an evidence of absence. And for believers, the fact that mainstream science dismisses Sitchin's work is further evidence of cover-up. The alien mothership-carrying Gardner probes is a more refined version of the panspermia hypothesis. Instead of accidental distribution of organic molecules, this theory proposes intentional seeding. 3 Atlas arrives, deploys smaller probes. Those probes land on planets and moons, and they other plant life directly or prepare environments for future habitation. Lowe's paper mentioned the possibility of 3 Atlas behaving like a dandelion, dispersing seeds. The imagery is evocative, a cosmic flower spreading genetic information across star systems. This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. If a civilization wanted to expand but couldn't travel at relativistic speeds, sending automated Gardner probes makes sense. They travel slowly, take centuries or millennia to reach targets, but once there, they terraform, seed, and prepare worlds. By the time the civilization develops faster travel, the new worlds are ready. It's a long-game strategy. Whether any civilization would commit to such a plan given the timescales and uncertainties is debatable, but it's technically possible with technology only slightly beyond ours. The November-December invasion countdown on Reddit is collective anxiety manifesting as countdown clock. Multiple threads track days until 3i Atlas emerges from behind the sun. The framing is apocalyptic. Will it have maneuvered? Will it have deployed probes? Will Earth be targeted? This is driven partly by Lowe's calculations about potential Earth intercept windows and partly by the dark forest framing. If 3 Atlas is hostile, late November or early December is when we'd find out. The countdown creates communal tension, a shared experience of waiting for a reveal. Psychologically, this is similar to end-times cults that predict specific dates for apocalypse or rapture. When the date passes without incident, believers either abandon the theory or rationalize. The date was wrong, but the concept is still valid. Or it did happen, but spiritually, not physically. The flexibility of interpretive frameworks allows almost any outcome to be accommodated without falsifying the core belief. If 3 Atlas does nothing unusual, the response will be it's waiting, or it's already completed its mission, or the real event was hidden from us. The theory becomes unfalsifiable, which removes it from scientific discourse, but doesn't diminish its psychological power. Mystery objects in Earth orbit not listed as spacecraft is a recurring claim. Amateur astronomers using tracking software sometimes spot objects that aren't in public satellite catalogs. This could be classified military satellites, space debris that hasn't been cataloged yet, or errors in observation. But in the context of 3 Atlas, it's interpreted as probes. If 3 Atlas deployed subcraft months ago before we were paying close attention, those craft could now be in Earth orbit observing us. There's no hard evidence for this. Satellite tracking communities are thorough, and if there were genuinely anomalous objects, they'd be documented and analyzed, but the claim persists because it's hard to prove a negative. How do you prove there's an eloped probe in orbit? The Vandenberg Air Force Base. Red Square UFO from October 14, 2003, 22 years before the Fatima anniversary date in 2025, is another numerological links readers made. On that date, multiple witnesses, including military personnel, reported seeing a massive red square object in the sky near Vandenberg. It was never officially explained. Connecting it to 3I Atlas requires believing that the same intelligence has been operating near Earth for decades, occasionally revealing itself, and that the 22-year gap is significant. In Sarita's framework, it relates to harmonic frequencies, and Fatima symbolism, since October 14th is one day after October 13th. This is numerology at its most flexible. Any two events can be connected if you allow enough degrees of freedom. But for people already convinced there's a pattern, each new connection reinforces belief. It's a web of meaning where every thread supports every other thread. Pulling one thread doesn't collapse the web, it just tightens elsewhere. This makes the theory resilient, but also untestable. If everything is connected, then nothing can falsify the connection. The Jeffrey Epstein files distraction theory is more cynical. It posits that the 3I story was floated by intelligence agencies to divert public attention from politically damaging revelations. The timing is suspicious. 3 Atlas discovered in July. Epstein-related documents released around the same time. Major news cycles competing for attention. In this view, astronomical phenomena are tools of information warfare. Got a story you want buried? Release something exotic to dominate headlines. Avibe addressed this directly, pointing out that 3 Atlas is a physical object observable by anyone with a decent telescope. It exists independently of terrestrial politics. The fact that its discovery coincided with other news is just that, coincidence. But the theory persists because it fits a worldview where nothing is random, where powerful actors manipulate everything, where the surface narrative always hides a deeper truth. It's exhausting to live in that worldview, but it's also seductive. It makes you feel informed, awake, while everyone else is asleep. Project Bluebeam is the granddaddy of fake alien invasion theories. Originally proposed by journalist Serge Monast in the 1990s, it claims that global elites plan to stage a false alien contact event using holograms, advanced aircraft, and media manipulation. The goal is to create a common threat that justifies world government, centralized control, and suppression of individual freedoms. In the Bluebeam scenario, 3I Atlas would be part of the setup, a real object, but one whose nature is being misrepresented to prepare the public for a staged reveal. When the fake aliens appear, people will believe it because they've been primed by months of speculation about 3 Atlas. This theory requires an almost omnipotent level of coordination among global powers, which is implausible given how fractious international relations actually are. But it resonates because it explains anomalies. Why are governments being evasive about 3 Atlas? Because they're managing the narrative for Bluebeam. Why is data being delayed? To allow time for fabrication. Any evidence can be incorporated. Real anomalies are part of the script. Lack of anomalies means the script is working. It's a closed loop. The belief that we're being prepared for stage disclosure through incremental revelations has some merit, though. even without invoking blue beam. If governments did have evidence of extraterrestrial life or technology, sudden full disclosure would be disruptive. A gradual process hinting, allowing speculation, releasing ambiguous data. This builds tolerance. By the time official confirmation comes, it's anticlimactic. Everyone already half believed it. This is how normalization works. The fringe becomes mainstream not through definitive proof, but through repeated exposure. 3 Atlas, regardless of what it actually is, functions as a normalization event for the idea that interstellar objects might be artificial. Whether that normalization is accidental or intentional is the question. Occam's razor suggests accidental. 3 Atlas is a comet. It has weird properties because comets are variable and people are reading too much into it. But Occam's razor is a heuristic, not a law. The simplest explanation is often, but not always, correct. And in situations involving intelligence, whether human or non-human, simple explanations can miss deception. If you're trying to hide, you make your probe look like a comet. If you're trying to manage public reaction, you release data slowly. Both strategies make the simple explanation is just a comet, and the government is just slow appear correct, even when they're not. The difficulty is distinguishing genuine conspiracy from pattern seeking and randomness. Some conspiracies are real. MK Ultra, Watergate, Tuskegee, experiments. These happened. Governments and organizations do coordinate in secret, manipulate information, and lie. But most conspiracy theories are wrong. The challenge is developing filters that catch real conspiracies without falling for false ones. It requires skepticism in both directions. Skeptical of official narratives, but also skeptical of alternative narratives. Most people pick a side and stick with it. Trust authorities always or distrust authorities always. Neither strategy is optimal. With 3 Atlas, the optimal strategy is wait for more data while entertaining multiple possibilities. Is probably a comet. It might be artificial. It could be something in between, a natural object with properties we don't yet understand. The wilder theories are Noonie blue beam alien motherships. They're less likely but not impossible. Assigning rough probabilities helps. Comet 90%, artificial probe 5%, exotic natural phenomenon 4%, elaborate hoax or SCOP 1%. As new data arrives, adjust. If 3 Atlas maneuvers, artificial jumps to 80%. If it fragments naturally, comet goes to 99%. This keeps your thinking flexible without abandoning judgment entirely. And right now, with the object hidden behind the sun and data delayed, flexibility is the most honest position anyone can hold.